Well, good afternoon again, everybody. Thank you for joining and for waiting. I appreciate your attendance. Welcome to the Biamp webinar series. Today's webinar is on the TesiraCONNECT TC-5D. So I'll start with a quick introduction. My name is Bill Schultze. I am a field sales engineer with Biamp. I primarily focus on the eastern part of the United States. I am based in the southeast, in Statesboro, Georgia, which is near Savannah. I started with Biamp last year in April, so about a year and a half I've been with the company. I've got a long history with Biamp products and an even longer history, maybe longer than I want to talk about, but longer history in the AV industry. So with that, I'm going to dive right in. Our agenda today is to cover the TC-5D, what it is, what its hardware looks like, its features and limitations. Then we'll move on to some system deployment examples, and then on to programming with the TC-5D, and that will actually entail some an actual demo that I'll be doing from my office here in Statesboro. And we'll finish up discussing some of the network limitations and requirements that you should be aware of when you're designing with TC-5D. So what is the TC-5D? Well, if you're familiar with the original TesiraCONNECT or TC5, it is the same, but it has AVB and Dante interfaces built in. If you're not familiar with the TesiraCONNECT or the original TC5, it is our 5-port AVB device for constructing Biamp-centric AVB systems. It has 5 ports, and 4 of those are capable of providing full PoE plus budget to your devices. The TC5D actually does participate in the Tesira configuration, unlike the TC5. It is able to host both Dante I/O blocks and AVB connections. As such, it functions as a media bridge to link Tesira AVB and Dante networks or devices. Essentially, it provides a Dante interface into an AVB system. It is not, however, an AVB interface for standards-based 1722.1 AVB devices that are not Biamp. So only implicit AVB connections are supported within this device. It will not also host other DSP blocks, so meters, level controls, etc., like your server class devices. It will not host those, only Dante I/O blocks. So here is what the hardware looks like, same as the original TesiraCONNECT. It's the same networking, so it can support up to 150 AVB streams, has the same PoE capabilities. It does have an updated locking power connector so that your power cord will be more secure, and this feature is also being ported into the new TC5 devices that are being produced. It also has additional components for AVB and Dante interfaces. So the main board has additional components to be able to support Dante and AVB. So this indicates that there will be no field upgrades from TC5 to TC5D. So it is not firmware updatable, and there are no parts that you can add. So if you need a TC5D, you have to purchase it as a TC5D. The mounting options are the same as the original. There is a TC5 bracket for under table and behind display mounting. So some of the features of TC5D: as a media bridge or media endpoint, it has the same specifications as a Tesira Forte. So AVB streams, AVB channels at 128 by 128, and Dante channels at 32 by 32, and they're AES-67 capable. Multiple TC-5Ds is a possible design scenario in a system. So it should be possible to use up to 10 TC-5Ds in a system. However, we have not been able to fully test that due to the challenges presented to us by the current pandemic situation. So that is a very conservative number, but one which is certainly most likely achievable. I would advise you with anything larger than that to consult with us and check in with support. Okay. All the ports are AVB or Dante enabled, and they auto-detect the role which that port will assume. And those roles can be either AVB or Dante, or both AVB and Dante, and I'll discuss that further in just a moment. The TC-5D is RSTP capable, as was the TC-5. TC-5D also adds support for IGMP snooping, as is something that may be required in some Dante implementations. Some limitations that would be good to be aware of, these are notable. Only AVB devices that are Tesira are supported in media bridge mode. Okay, so if you're bridging Dante and AVB, only Tesira AVB devices will be supported in a design like that. It is not possible to bridge parlay mics into a Tesira DAN system. Parlay mics use back-channel communications with the DSP over the AVB channel, and this is not currently implemented in Dante. That said, all other AVB peripherals and expanders are supported. Dante and AVB on the same link, and we'll explore this in a little more depth towards the end of the presentation, but only supported for Biamp devices. And at this time, that's the TC5 or the TC5D. And that has to do with the Dante and AVB connections kind of jockeying and vying for the same resources. And it's only possible for Biamp to mediate that communications properly if it's from one Biamp device that we know how it works to another that we know how it works. We'll discuss that a little bit further here as we move forward through the presentation. So let's move on to some system deployment examples. First, we'll discuss adding a Dante device or adding Dante in general to an Tesira AVB system. Dante devices such as mixers or microphones or other I/O devices on a Tesira AVB system can easily be added simply by connecting that device to the existing AVB system via the TC5D. If it's a PoE powered device, such as this wall plate, then it's a simple connection and configuration operation to make that functional in the system. Additionally, you could also connect the Tesira AVB system to a Dante distribution network to give the entire Dante network access to the Tesira AVB and vice versa. So it merely works as an extension of the Dante network, as another node on that Dante network. Conversely, if you wish to add a Tesira AVB device to a Tesira DAN system, you would connect it as you see here. This is not necessarily recommended for a clean, fresh, or new design, as it is more difficult and less intuitive to implement. as well as potentially more expensive in the device category. However, for existing systems, this is perfectly acceptable and supported. There is multiple steps, however, as I said, to configuring. We'll explore those as we go through the demonstration that I'm going to conduct here in just a moment. You could also connect the Tesira DAN system to a Tesira AVB network in much the same way that you can connect the Dante network to a Tesira AVB system. So full access to that Tesira AVB network can be granted to the Tesira DAN system. So we'll move on to some programming with the TC-5D. So the TC-5D shows in the equipment list and the equipment table just like a server class device would. However, because it is both an expander and can host blocks in that way, it's essentially a hybrid device. So we've created a new class of device called infrastructure to indicate and take that into account. So you can add the TC-5D manually to your equipment table, and you'll find it under the infrastructure category. The Tesira compiler will auto-assign a TC-5D if it finds Dante AVB bridging in the layout, and it is added at the compile. You can also manually add this to the equipment table and assign blocks and fix them in the unit to force the compiler to do your bidding, essentially to have it compile exactly the way you want. As you'll see when we move through the demo, this is not always necessary. Device settings look much like the TC5 did. So with the addition of a tab for Dante, as far as the network settings are concerned, there is a common IP for the control and Dante networks. They share an interface, so they will share an IP address and a MAC address as well. Okay. The AVB and Dante interface tabs, I will point out some, I want to back up here. I would just like to point out that this is also on this control tab where you would enable IGMP, should you so need that. RSTP is enabled here, as you can see, by default. On the Dante tab, you'll note that you could actually configure the IP address. This is actually not, this is an unintentional feature. If you do, you may either cause problems or the settings will not take from here. As I said, the control and Dante interfaces share an IP address. You can have different host names, but you cannot have a different IP address. So in future updates to the Tesira software, this will be essentially grayed out and a read-only tab. But for now, it is recommended not to try to change any settings here other than, as I said, the host name. So let's walk through the process of adding some Dante I/O to my AVB only layout. As you can see, I've got an AVB system built here, and I've got a Dante I/O pair, a 2-channel I/O pair in the layout. And when I compile, the compiler automatically added the TC5D to the Forte AVB CI that this particular configuration required and the XUBT. Now, if I want to add Tesira AVB IO to a Dante only layout, process is somewhat different. First of all, in the case of adding this EXUBT to the layout, you will need to add Dante output-input pairs to the layout for each input or output going to an AVB device. So we've added those here. And remember that by default, the compiler will assign this to a Forte AVB and a TC-5D. So when I compile this, it is actually saying that it requires the same equipment as the previous configuration, a Forte AVB CI, a Connect TC-5D, and an XUBT. We would like this to be Dante, so we have to take some additional steps to make that happen. Those steps would be to fix a Dante block in the Forte and then compile. And that would look like this. So in this particular instance, I have fixed the Dante mic 4-channel input to the number 1 Forte unit, as well as the AEC inputs. And when I compile, you can see that I now have my Forte DAN CI, as well as the TC-5D and the EXUBT properly configured. Now, all that would remain to make this configuration functional would be to load it in the system, and then, of course, make the connections in the Dante network using Dante controller. I will demonstrate that here in the demo coming up here in the next section. So here's my demo setup. As you can see, I've got 2 Forte units. We will not be using these for both demos. There's 2 sections to the demo. In the first section, I will use the Forte VI. I also have my TesiraCONNECT TC-5D, and I have an XUBT and an AMP 450p connected to it, as well as I've extended my network here using just a standard Netgear network switch to accommodate me talking to the system via the Tesira software and Dante controller on my PC. And I'm running Dante virtual sound card to take the place of a Dante wall plate on my MacBook Pro. That's also connected to the same network. I also have my Dante unit, which I will use for part of the demo as well, a DAN AI, which is connected. Both the control and Dante connections are on the Netgear switch. So with that, I'll switch over to my software here. So first we'll do the configuration of the adding a Dante device to an AVB system. So as you can see here, I have the AMP 450p and my XUBT connected, and I want to use 4 Dante inputs with this system. So I will, now that I've built this configuration, I will compile it, and you can see that the TC-5D has been added along with my Forte VI and the XUBT and the AMP 450p. It's pretty straightforward to go into my equipment table now and assign the appropriate equipment. Multiple UBTs, make sure I select the correct one. Of course, I have to proxy the expander devices. Okay. And now I can load this to my system. Start audio. So as you can see, the system's still a bit unhappy because I don't have my Dante connections routed properly. So for that, I will bring up Dante controller. And as you can see, here is the MacBook Pro running. It'll be transmitting now 4 channels of audio that I will connect to my TesiraCONNECT, which I've labeled so that I understand exactly where to connect them. And so those are running. This should not be running. Okay. And now my system is green and everybody is happy. All the connections have been made. So that is adding a Dante device to an AVB system. Very straightforward. Now I will disconnect. And before I go to do the rest of the demo, I will reset my Dante controller so I don't get a lot of complaints from the system. And I will also clear the configuration in this system. This will just take a moment. Thank you for your patience. Okay. So now I will bring up my other configuration here. So this is the configuration I'm going to use to demonstrate adding AVB devices to a Dante system. So I have the same AMP 450p and XUBT. And of course the TC-5D, and I'm going to add these, I'm going to connect them in a configuration using the Dan AI device. So I need to turn this off. So when I configure, or rather when I compile this system, as I noted earlier in the slides, this will automatically configure for a Forte AVB system with the TC-5D, the AMP 450, and the XUBT. And that is not what we need. So to fix that, it's a simple matter to take this Dante block, this 4-channel input block. I will fix it in the Forte unit via the DSP properties for that block. Set that to true. And now when I recompile again, I have the correct configuration for my system: Forte Dan AI, TC-5D, and my 2 expander devices. So now I can go to my equipment table, assign the devices appropriately. And proxy the 2 expander devices. Hit OK. And now I can load this to my system. So there was an extra step there we had to take, a couple of extra steps really, to get this system up and running. Note the additional Dante output-input pairs that I had mentioned during the slides. So we've got 3 pairs that we'll have to make sure that we route in Dante controller appropriately, as well as my Dante inputs will still need to be routed to the Forte unit. So bring up Dante controller. So now we have to route the input wall plate, which is again being filled in for by this MacBook, and I will route that to my Dante receive channels in my Forte. Okay, I also need to have my Dante route for the EXUBT receive on the TesiraCONNECT. And that is going to be in my Forte as well. And then the last three routes I need to make are for the speaker outputs and the EXUBT transmit. And these are all from the Forte transmitting to the Connect. So 8 connections I needed to make there. And as you can see, the system is green. Everybody's happy. So that is adding everything into a Dante system. So a few more steps, a little bit more routing, and of course you have to do a little bit extra work in Dante controller as well. So that's the demo. I will move on to network requirements and limits, things to keep in mind when you're designing. So you can mix TC5 and TC5D devices up to 4 total. So if you need more Dante interfaces, certainly you can use multiple TC5Ds. You can use just one if you only have to connect, say, to a Dante network. Okay. Remember that TC5D can be attached to larger Dante or AVB networks. And we just demonstrated that live in the demo. The slides also showed that earlier before the demo. Only Tesira AVB devices are supported, however, no third-party AVB. So Tesira AVB implicit routing and Dante networks are supported together. This will work pretty much with any supported AVB switch. So those switches which are listed on the Cornerstone website on our approved AVB switch page. So if you're wondering about support for this, for any configuration that might use an external network, then consult with that page to make sure that you have a supported switch. TC5D only has a single IP address that's shared by the control and Dante interfaces. Okay, so don't edit on the Dante tab. And in fact, that will be read-only in future versions of the Tesira software. There's support for spanning tree protocol and IGMP snooping. Just like the TC5 had spanning tree, now TC5D adds IGMP support. The topologies that are supported are the same for both TesiraCONNECT, the original TC5 and TC5D, both star and daisy chain. There's no support for separated networks mode, so only single cable or converged mode is supported, since TC5D requires that control traffic, so because it is a device that is hosting blocks. Okay. So daisy chaining with a DAN Forte, you can have up to 4 units supporting 12 devices. And as you can see, we have both the Dante and control networks connected to this TC5D network. Same with the star network. You can support up to 4 devices, 4 units and 12 devices, and both control and Dante networks are connected. So let's take a moment to talk about connectivity modes for the individual ports. So the firmware sets up the roles based on the parameters of the traffic that has been connected when you plug in the cable. So if there are no AVB or Dante traffic present, then only control or other traffic, then that's considered not a mode, or just plain mode, if you will. If AVB traffic is connected, then the port assumes the AVB role or mode. Same with Dante, so when Dante traffic is detected. Okay. AVB and Dante is only supported, as I mentioned earlier, when connected to Tesira devices, i.e. TesiraCONNECT devices, so a TC5 or a TC-5D. Again, this is because the AVB and Dante traffic will compete for similar resources on the network, and this is something that we can only control when we understand and control all the devices at each end of that link. So let's explore that AVB and Dante connectivity mode just a little bit further. So here is a Tesira Dante room connected to a Tesira AVB network that is using AVNU or Biamp approved switches. But note that it has both Dante and AVB traffic on it, and as such, this will not work. Okay, this is something that you need to avoid in your design if you are connecting both AVB and Dante networks. This, however, could be avoided by replacing or at least interfacing to that network using an AVB and Dante capable device, a TesiraCONNECT. So I can place a TC-5D on the other side of that bridge and bridge that Tesira Dante room to the AVB network on the other side. So this is supported. Now, it is understood that, there's not a lot of ports in a design like this. So of course you can daisy chain additional devices as needed to add the ports that you require. If I want to go to a Tesira AVB network, then, and I don't have a TC5 to connect to it, I could also route my AVB and Dante traffic separately, as you see here. This would be a supported design. This would work. So that pretty much brings us to the end of the presentation. I did want to make you all aware of the cornerstone resources that are available. So there's a few articles I'd like to highlight here on the TC5D, and specifically on how to add AVB devices into a Dante system. And then there's a nice design library article on connecting Dante mics into a Forte AVB system. There are other articles as well, so going to support.biamp.com or the Cornerstone homepage and typing in TC5D in the search bar will bring you to many of those articles. I want to just bring up my final slide here that thanks you and shows you my contact information. I would be happy to have you reach out to me if you have any further questions that come up. Thank you again. I appreciate your time, everybody, this afternoon, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.